Hey composer, Zach Heyde here, hope you're doing well. Today I want to talk about some shortcuts that I use extensively when I'm making my orchestral MIDI mockups. These are shortcuts that a lot of you were asking me about in previous videos, and I thought it'd be good to kind of go over some of my personal favorites and ones that I don't think are covered very much on YouTube. I definitely recommend you stick around to the end of the video because you might learn something you didn't know before, and as always, if you find this video helpful and you enjoy it, you can leave me a like and subscribe for more. So first things first, when you're recording your ideas, I highly recommend you try capture recording. It's a really useful feature. I've talked about it before, but if you go to your key commands with Option K and you type in capture recording, you'll find this shortcut. Now, my shortcuts won't be the same as yours, and that's because I've made these all custom. So make sure you actually type in the shortcut that you want to use, and then create your own key command if you'd like to, or use the default. I believe the default is Shift-R for this one. Now, capture recording is nice because if you're recording your ideas and you keep undoing, having to delete and start over, instead of doing that, you can actually just reset, play, without ever hitting record, and when you've got the idea you want, it will retrospectively capture your recording. So if I'm playing, I make a mistake, I can go back over, and then use my capture recording shortcut, and it'll capture the last performance that I did. Now, a feature you can pair onto this is to move the locate position, the playhead, back to the original start point. So if you type in locate, you'll see go to last locate position. This is nice because you can actually keep resetting to the original spot. It's kind of like what Pro Tools does. When you hit stop, it should go back to the original position. So we're playing, make a mistake, I just press my shortcut, go back one more time, etc. And then we can capture a recording. So you can pair these together really nicely. Now the next set of shortcuts is more for navigation. So when you're working around a big template, it's pretty hard to keep track of things and stay organized. So there's a couple ways that I recommend you can do this. The first is know your shortcuts for opening and closing instruments, track stacks, turning instruments on and off, and accessing the audio plugins. Believe it or not, there are shortcuts for all of those. Again, if you go in key commands and you type in track stack, you should see shortcuts for opening a track stack as well as opening all track stacks. That's a really useful one because we can be navigating, open up our flutes, close the flutes, open the oboes, close those, open up all of them at the same time, collapse all of them. That can be very, very useful to kind of condense your view or expand it as you need it. Now, as for turning instruments on and off, again, key commands, you type in track on, you should be able to see there's one toggle track on. It's a nice one because we can just press O, which is what I have set for mine, to turn this track on or off if you have your instruments disabled. Now, if you want to disable it, you could press O to turn it off, but that's not going to unload all the RAM, unfortunately. So the only way I know to do that is to actually option click the power button. Once you have the instrument on, another nice shortcut is to be able to open the instrument itself. And if you type in instrument, you should be able to see open close instrument plugin of focus track. That's really nice because we can actually just open up the flutes and close the flutes with the same shortcut, turn the track on and off. And the last shortcut mentioned in here would be to access the actual audio unit plugins. That's really cool because I actually have gain set to the first instrument of all of these. And the reason I do this is to actually gain stage. But what's cool about that is I can actually have a shortcut to access the gain. So if we type in insert, you'll see open close audio insert plugin 1 of focus track. So for me, I did G for gain. So what that means is on any track, G will open up the gain. Now, if there was a different plugin on the first insert, that would open up instead, but I have gain for the first one. And you could keep down the line if you wanted to. You could have insert 2, for example, be EQ, insert 3 be compression. The important thing would be to make sure that it's happening on all of your tracks. Otherwise, it can get a little inconsistent, but it's a really nice feature nonetheless. Now, another really interesting way to navigate tracks that I don't see people talk about very much is to use groups. If you're familiar with groups, you can actually just, access your groups over here on this tab, and you can add different instruments to groups. Normally, this is used for being able to control automation, soloing, panning, that sort of thing. But because there are shortcuts inside Logic for selecting groups, if you type it in, select members of group 1, group 2, etc. For all 64, there is quite a bit of customizability. So for example, one thing that I did is I wanted to be able to edit all of my pitched instruments at once. So highlight all the pitch things, but not the percussion instruments. So for every instrument, I just highlighted them all. I added them to group 1, except for the percussion. And now with this shortcut, I can access everything except for the percussion. So all the orchestral percussion's cut out, the drum kit is cut out. I can then transpose things up and down as I want to without impacting the percussion. Another one I did is group 2 is all MIDI. I added all MIDI tracks to group 2. So now if I do that shortcut, I can select all MIDI and all the audio tracks are not selected. So that can be pretty useful. Okay, so now let's talk about MIDI editing. Now, MIDI editing is really important in the mockup world. It's, pretty much the majority of what we're doing. So it's important to get these shortcuts quickly down. So the first one is quantization. There are so many people who don't set these shortcuts for quantization. It blows my mind because it is so useful. So in key commands, if you type in quantize, you'll see that you can set different numbers or key commands or whatever you want for each of these quantization values. And I highly recommend you do that. So I've made it pretty simple. Whole note is 1, half note is 2, quarter is 4, 8 is eighth, 16th notes are 9, and it just keeps going. And then for the triplets, I've just used option 2, option 4, option 8, etc. That's amazingly useful because if I know, for example, that this phrase that I'm playing is predominantly quarter notes with 1/8 in here, I could just press 8 right on the region and it'll quantize it within here. And that's just incredibly useful. You can also do that right inside the piano roll if you want to. You highlight everything. You can go note by note, but that's a very important one. The next one is velocity. Now, there's a lot of ways you can tweak velocity. There is a velocity tool here, which if that's selected, you can click and drag. You can actually even toggle find the velocity here, and you can adjust them to your heart's content there. But the one I actually really recommend that's kind of interesting is the user transforms. Most people don't talk about this too much, but in MIDI transform, you'll see this one called fixed velocity. Now that's default set to 100, and you can operate on that and make it all 100. But what I've done is I've changed this number and saved each one as a preset. So increments of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, etc. And you can see here I have them all as different user presets. Now why that's cool is because, you guessed it, inside of the key commands, if we type in transform, you'll see that there are shortcuts for each of these transforms. And I have done Control Option 1 down the line. So I can basically have my velocity triggered by shortcuts in increments of 10. I find that really useful because sometimes it's just easier to do shortcut than it is to click and drag a bunch of stuff. And different legato speeds can be triggered by velocity, and sometimes you just want to be able to access that really quickly. Now that brings me into legato. There are a lot of ways to program legato, but here is my preferred method. So the first thing is force legato. Really useful shortcut. If you type in force legato, you'll see you have two. One of them is to the following notes, which I don't like to use, and one of them is to selected, which I do like to use. Now that one is useful because it will basically force that legato, meaning it'll bring all the notes right up against each other. Now that's not the end of this process because the notes need to be overlapped in order for them to trigger legato. So normally what people might do is you might click and drag to create that overlap, and that's fine. But there's a shortcut to nudge the region lengths over, and I personally recommend that method because I'm all about the keystrokes instead of the dragging. So nudge region event length right by 10 milliseconds is a nice one. And if we do that, we can kind of keep clicking as we want, and it'll drag those all to the right. Now the last thing that we have to do that's really important, in this instance we don't have any repeated notes, but let's say this note was repeated. The problem is if we do those shortcuts, we're getting this overlap right here. And there's different ways you can remove that overlap. O actually removes overlap. But if you wanted to have that happen for all of your selected notes, you can actually create a shortcut if you type in remove overlap. There's an amazingly just astute shortcut here. I don't know why they thought to add this. Trim note to remove overlaps for repeated. So it's only looking for repeated notes and then removing those overlaps themselves. So in this case, if I did it over the entire thing, it's only removing the overlap for that note. Now, if you want to save yourself the memorization process of that, what you could use is something like Keyboard Maestro and create a macro, which is what I've done. So my macro actually does all of those shortcuts at once. So the way that looks is like this. I just do my quantization, drag this note, and then my macro, and it's done. A lot quicker, less memorization. So now I'm going to show you what all this looks like in real time so you can really see why it's so beneficial to get these shortcuts. Okay, so I can open the track stack, go to the violin, turn that track on, open the instrument, make sure that everything's working properly. It is. Close the instrument, go to my gain, make it maybe -3, record. Made a mistake, start over. Capture recording, open the piano roll, go in here, select all, quantize it, do my force legato macro, and then shift this over to the right. And I want these all to be a little bit more portamento, so we're going to do our shortcut for the velocity using the user transforms. And there you have it. That is why it's so important to get all these shortcuts, because it might seem small, each individual one, but when used together, they can become a really, really powerful force. Now, if you'd like to see this in a more musical context, you can check out my other series where I compose in real time, and that's where I utilize these shortcuts kind of in action on the spot. Again, if you enjoyed this video, I hope you leave a like, subscribe for more, and if you want to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee, or you can join me on Patreon, where we have a couple of incentives for people who support me there, like MIDI, MP3s, and a couple of bonus videos. Thanks again so much for watching. I'm Heyde, and I will see you in the next video.